Hey everyone, welcome back to the Phoenix's Tale. I am your host Gabe, and this week we are starting Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, and we are diving into chapter 1, The Worst Birthday. So, let's get to our recap. The first thing I want to mention here is, as a Harry Potter fan, this is my least favorite of the 7 books in the series, mostly because, and I don't want to spoil anything here, Harry faces off with Voldemort at the end of this book again. And for the first time, it really felt like the series was going to be quite boring for me after I finished reading this book. But there's a bit of a interesting story to this as to how I came into the Harry Potter series, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. And the reason why I felt like this was going to be really boring is because I knew at the time, I thought actually, that the third book, Prisoner of Azkaban, was going to end the same way. And so that every single fucking book in the series was going to be, oh, Harry faces Voldemort. Harry faces Voldemort. Harry faces Voldemort. And when we get to Prisoner of Azkaban, we are going to talk about this again when we get toward the end of that book. Because for those who aren't familiar with the series, whether through the movies or the books, it ends quite differently than I expected. I'm going to leave it there for now. So, one of the reasons that this really was brought to a head for me was because Chamber of Secrets was actually the first book that I read. And how that happened is, Chamber of Secrets had just come out. My mom and I were at Costco one day, and we were going through the book section, and she picked up Chamber of Secrets, just to give you kind of an insight as to how inattentive my mother is to things. Okay, and why last week I kind of went on a rant about the fact that when I'm trying to vent things to her, just to relieve some of the pressure, she takes the conversation down these trains of thought that actually have nothing to do with what I'm talking about, at least in my mind. Okay. And I get very frustrated with her, even though I've tried to explain several times to just stop doing that, because it makes no sense to me. I don't care if it makes sense to her to ask these questions or to say that thing or this thing. It makes no sense to me. But she mistook Chamber of Secrets as a book. She saw something on the news about this 13-year-old girl who had written, these books. And she thought it was the Harry Potter series. So, let's get this book and see what a 13-year-old can do. And so that's how we ended up reading Chamber of Secrets. Well, naturally, as I'm reading through Chamber of Secrets and I'm looking at the very beginning of the book where it lists, the other books by this author, I see Sorcerer's Stone. Oh shit, we skipped Harry's first year of Hogwarts. We need to go back and get Sorcerer's Stone, which we did. So then I read Sorcerer's Stone and then reread Chamber of Secrets. So that is why I felt like, oh, okay, this is going to be the same old craziness. But again, like I said, we're going to talk about this more when we get to Prisoner of Azkaban. So, yeah, anyway, my mother, she's quite a boob about things like that. So she doesn't pay attention or write things down. She often gets things wrong or doesn't know whenever I ask her a question about something. And it's just been a lifelong frustration for me. Just one of the many things. Which is not to say that I don't love my mother. I do very much. And the reason why, despite her not so pleasant aspects, like those types of things that don't really help me in the long run, is I never questioned her love for me. As opposed to my father, he didn't love me and my brothers at all based on his actions, and actions speak louder than words. We all know that. So Yes, I have issues with my mother, but at least with my mother, I feel like there is a chance that I can find a way to finally break through to get her to see, you know, we have an unhealthy dynamic here. We need to fix it. There was never a chance of that with my father. So I do vent a lot about my mother, in part also because I have been really processing the things that she did that did not help me when combined with my father's verbal abuse throughout my childhood. So anyway, let's get to the recap. So anyway, it's Harry's 12th birthday, and it begins with Uncle Vernon yelling at him about Hedwig's racket about being locked up in her cage the whole time. Further to the conversation, Uncle Vernon begins talking about this big deal he was hoping to land for his job at Grunnings. Harry, in his frustration over his birthday being forgotten, and the fact that Ron and Hermione and Hagrid haven't written to him, and he's been home for about a month at this point. So he, out of frustration, goads Dudley into thinking he was about to do magic, which pissed off Aunt Petunia and resulted in Harry being worked to the bone to prepare for their dinner guests that evening. At the end of the day, when the Dursleys' dinner guests arrive, Harry goes to be in his bedroom, making no noise, pretending he's not there, only to find that his bedroom is not empty. There is someone else there. Those of us familiar know who it is. Those of us not familiar, you're going to have to wait till next week because that's how she wrote this book. So we don't know who it is, but one of my favorite characters in the book. Right off the bat, there was one topic in this chapter that literally, almost literally, I'll say not literally, but almost literally knocked me on my ass as far as, oh shit, I need to talk about this. So, how I deal with friendships ending. And yeah, I pulled that out of Harry's frustration that he hadn't heard from Ron and Hermione or even Hagrid for a month since he's been back home at Privet Drive. And usually when I or they, the other person, said friend, leave a job, graduate school, move to a completely different town, state, whatever. In our discussion this week, I'm also going to dive into how this is a typical pattern for certain neurodivergent types, because that was actually kind of an interesting thought to me. This surely this can't be just an autism thing. I've been the type of person who tends to let friendships go when they end in such a fashion, and naturally. When they end naturally, basically. So Harry's frustration and sadness over not having heard from Ron or Hermione at all since the end of the school year is one that I have experienced throughout my entire life. I have learned recently that this is a common trait amongst certain neurodivergent types. So we're going to take a look at those real quick and a brief explanation as to the why for each type. So we're going to start with autism spectrum disorder, which is me. The reason why, when there's a shift in the dynamic of some sort, like I said, switching jobs, moving to a new town, graduating school, what have you, autistics, it's our differences in communication and social expectations that can lead to misunderstandings and isolations when friendships change or end. Autistic individuals may selectively invest emotionally and find socializing draining, which is me. I'm very much an introvert in that. So any of the friends that I've had throughout the years who may have been coworkers, classmates, whatever, when they or I have left, those friendships just quietly go away. I tend to not reach out because it's draining to me at that point to keep up a relationship that changes in some way. So for me, as an autistic, that affects the maintenance of the relationship, of the friendship. Other neurodivergent types, sorry, not neurotypical, neurodivergent types that tend to have the same experience or similar experiences with friendships ending are those with ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And this is characterized with them as forgetfulness, impulsivity, emotional sensitivity, like rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is also on the list. I'll get to that in a minute. And an all or nothing social energy that can contribute to friendships fading despite a desire for connection. Another neurodivergent type that struggles in similar fashion are those with social anxiety disorder, where fear of judgment and avoidance of social situations can make sustaining friendships harder and increase feelings of isolation. So I can see how something like that would pan out for somebody with social anxiety disorder, because when, if they're, they have like a best friend at work, and said best friend goes to another job, there's probably, for people with social anxiety disorder, I can understand that they may have felt abandoned or isolated in some way from said friend, and so now that friendship is over. So rejection sensitivity dysphoria was an interesting one. It often present with ADHD, as we just discussed. It amplifies emotional responses to perceived rejection and inclusion, not unlike social anxiety disorder. Amplifies emotional responses to perceived rejection and exclusion, increasing social withdrawal when friendships weaken or end. Naturally, because I'm autistic, I wanted to dive deeper into this phenomenon, because all of my life it seems that I was told that anything I did was wrong, including this. I mean, there was always this message that you're supposed to have a lot of friends and you're supposed to spend time with your friends, except all of this felt normal to me to just let those friendships go. And so over the years, it's been easier for me to just accept, okay, well, then this particular person is not meant to be in my life anymore, if that makes any sense. But here's the why of it. And again, any of the references I use for the psychological aspects I talk about in my podcast are going to be in the show notes for you if you wish to dig in deeper yourself. When the actual friendship ends after one person moves away, changes jobs, or life circumstances physically separate people, this is often experienced differently in autistic individuals due to several factors. Physical separation as a natural endpoint. For many autistic people, the loss of physical proximity removes the foundation for sustaining the friendship. Yeah. I'm not one that could do a long distance relationship by any stretch of the imagination, or, maintain a friendship, maintain any of the friendships that I had when I left California with my mom, my brother, baby brother, and my son in 2009 when we moved back here to Michigan, because we weren't there anymore. We couldn't go out to lunch. We couldn't go to a movie. We couldn't go shopping. We couldn't do normal friend things because we didn't live there anymore. Because removes the foundation for sustaining the friendship. Okay. Because autistic friendships often rely on predictable routines, regular in-person interaction, or shared environments, losing those can feel like the friendship genuinely ends rather than just changes form. Excuse me. Challenges with long distance or less frequent contact. Autistic individuals may find maintaining friendships over distance or with less frequent communication more difficult. I do. Differences in communication styles, social energy needs, and sensory preferences make adapting to long distance or irregular contact more taxing. So many friendships fade naturally after physical separation. Emotional processing of the loss. The end of these friendships can bring significant grief, but also a pragmatic acceptance. Some autistic people may experience intense rumination or sadness over lost friendships, while others might more readily let go as a form of protecting emotional energy and avoiding distress from uncertain social demands, such as a long-distance relationship / friendship of some kind. Grief and self-reflection. Even when a friendship ends due to life changes, autistic people may deeply grieve the loss, especially if the friendship offered rare understanding or emotional safety. However, they may also struggle with trust and fear that new friendships will end the same way, leading to self-protective distancing. I want to talk about this a little bit because I have been thinking a lot about a couple people from my past who offered that rare understanding and emotional safety. Yes, those relationships they've been over for a very long time. However, like I said, they are the ones that I tend to bring up most often when I'm struggling or going through something. And throughout the entire process of getting this podcast up and running and doing all the research and diving deep into the psychological aspects of each chapter that we have been going through, I have been thinking about those two individuals a lot because of that, because they were the ones who truly, I felt, understood me in a way that nobody else around me seemed to. And they were emotionally safe spaces for me to vent, to talk, to, have those deeper conversations that I crave. So yeah, it sucks that they're gone. They're not dead, as far as I know, but they are no longer in my life. But that is often the case, or often not the case, sorry, when other friendships, the rest of the friendships throughout my life have gone away. It's just, oh, yeah, okay. Like I said, it's just, this person's not meant to be in my life anymore, as opposed to those two that I'm thinking about. Selective social energy investment. This is the last part of what I was talking about. Loss of physical connection often leads autistic people to prioritize social energy investment in fewer, closer relationships and quietly let go of the rest. Yes, I do. This process is common and not indicative of a lack of caring, but rather a neurodivergent way of managing limited social energy and sensory resources. In essence, autistic people commonly view friendship endings after physical separation as more final and harder to sustain remotely, which aligns with their communication styles and energy needs. The emotional response may vary from deep grief to pragmatic acceptance. Deep grief on a couple of them, pragmatic acceptance for everybody else, but is often accompanied by self-protection and shifts in social priorities. So I talked a lot in the last book, Sorcerer's Throne, about social connections as an autistic person, but this was one that I hadn't really explored with myself yet. So I thought I would take the time to research it and talk about it. Naturally, we learn that Harry is still friends with Ron and Hermione. We'll talk more about that next week as it pertains to the Chamber of Secrets. So it's not a direct correlation, but his initial emotions on the matter were a perfect launching pad for me for this discussion. So I want to clarify something. Let's explain how things usually go in this structure. I've often developed good friendships with coworkers at various jobs over the many decades that I've been working. But when I left to take my job in Yellowstone in 1997, I was working retail at the time and had quite a few good friends amongst my fellow coworkers. Those friendships from that retail job fell away rather quickly. I know that a lot of it has to do with my childhood trauma as well, but the primary impetus for that is the fact that I'm autistic, as I just read all those bullet points. So, in other words, once a work friend leaves or I leave said employer, it's out of sight, out of mind for me. And I now know it's for all of the reasons that I just discussed. I want to be clear here that it's not because I didn't genuinely care about those people. I did. I truly did. But when we add on the childhood trauma, it becomes even more interesting as to how this phenomenon has developed with me, or developed for me at least. Some psychology for you on this one. Childhood emotional neglect disrupts the development of healthy attachment, which can foster a deep fear of being forgotten or unworthy of care unless directly present in someone's life. This wound often translates into anxious or avoidant attachment styles. I would say I believe it's I should have looked this up, I'm sorry. But I believe it's called a disorganized attachment style, where part of me is anxious, is everything okay? Is everything okay? Did I do anything wrong? Blah, blah, blah. And avoidant. It's a mix of the two. And it really fucking sucks. I'm just going to say it. This wound, anxious or avoidant attachment style. Okay. Where individuals become hypervigilant for signs of rejection, struggle to trust that relationships will continue when one of us is absent from one another, and feel inherently invisible. These beliefs are rooted in the psychological need for consistent emotional validation that was unmet in childhood, leading to chronic anxiety and low self-worth in adult relationships. According to longitudinal psychology research, adults with histories of childhood emotional neglect are statistically more likely to exhibit anxious attachment, characterized by persistent concern that others will forget them or withdraw emotionally when not directly interacting. This attachment anxiety can mediate ongoing mental health challenges such as depression, anxiety, and diminished self-esteem, supporting the idea that the belief of being forgotten when absent is not just a feeling, but a long-lasting effect of early neglect. The number of times that I was fine, I was the easy child, right there. Emotional neglect in childhood can manifest in several distinct ways. Here's a list of what it can look like based on psychological research and clinical guidelines. Oh, yeah, we're going to dive into how that happens because of childhood emotional neglect. Lack of emotional availability. This is when caregivers are emotionally distant, unresponsive, or consistently unavailable. Ignoring or dismissing feelings. A child's emotions are minimized, ignored, or the child is told to toughen up or stop being so sensitive, invalidating their experience. Absence of affection, little or no physical comfort, hugs, or reassurance from caregivers. Inadequate attention to emotional needs. Caregivers rarely listen to concerns, offer comfort, or celebrate achievements. So far, I am 4 for 4. Yeah, let's go 5 for 5. Failure to validate experiences. A child's emotional experiences, such as bullying or sadness, are neither acknowledged nor supported. 5 for 5. Lack of encouragement. Little support for interests or talents, which diminishes self-worth. We're 6 for 6. Feeling invisible or unimportant. The child feels unseen, unheard, or believes there is something missing but cannot identify it. 7 for 7. Being cut off from feelings. Or are we 6 for 6? I don't know. Being cut off from feelings. Difficulty expressing, recognizing, or describing emotions or emotional numbing. Overwhelmed or discouraged easily. Struggling to cope and quick to feel defeated. Had that a lot. Low self-esteem and sensitivity to rejection. Chronic feelings of inadequacy and heightened fear of rejection. Yep. Perfectionism or difficulty with boundaries sometimes emerges from parenting styles focused only on achievement, not emotion. I would say yes for my father, but no on my mother on that one. She didn't really do that. My father, however, was all about, and still is, appearances and what other people think. That's where grades. Oh my God, his reaction to our report cards. And when we were in elementary and junior high school, it was every fucking quarter. So we got 4 report cards a year. And I had to listen to his bullshit 4 times a year, as did my brothers. So essentially, that's 12 a year when you cycle into the fact that, I heard the shit my brothers got from their report cards too, from my father. So it wasn't just me. Anyway, so this is likely why those like me with one of the neurodivergent types that we discussed earlier, mixing with childhood trauma, that includes being emotionally neglected. That's important. Because not all childhood trauma includes emotional neglect on some level. Okay. A lot of it does, obviously. Because whoever should be taking care of said child or is harming said child obviously does not give a shit about said child. So when you take one of those neurodivergent types that we talked about, along with any childhood trauma that includes being emotionally neglected, we often see friendships end when a situation shifts in some way. This is perfectly normal for a significant chunk of us. Anyway, I'm sorry to be a bummer this week. And I went on a bit of a rant last week. But this has been my existence for nearly 54 years. And one that I've accepted as normal. This is just how it is. Plus, there's another aspect of this that has always come as a relief to me when a given friendship is over. Despite the initial pain, there's often an underlying sense of relief when a friendship ends, because on some level, that connection may not have fully, or did not fully meet my needs or allow me to feel authentic. So when we put it all together, in short, most of the people that I was sad that there was no more friendship, but at the same time, oh, thank God. It is such a relief. And like I said earlier about, feeling emotionally drained, it was often a relief with some of these friendships were just gone. I didn't have to worry about them anymore. Ending a friendship can release the burden of emotional mismatch, misunderstandings, or, this is what I'm trying to say here, energy spent managing a connection that wasn't quite the right fit. That's what I'm trying to talk about here. This pragmatic perspective acknowledges the complexity of relationships, recognizing that not all friendships are meant to last forever, and that endings can open space for healthier, more compatible connections. And with very limited mental and emotional capacity for interpersonal relationships, I find safety in solitude. So, not to dismiss any of the people that I'm seeing in my mind that have come and gone over the years as terrible people. They weren't terrible people, not really. The bulk of them were okay people. They just weren't the right fit for me. yeah, it's a relief. It is a relief for me. So I know we kind of went down a weird road this week. But like I said, Harry's feelings about maybe he really didn't have as good of friends in Ron and Hermione as he thought. We find out next week that that's not true. We'll dive into that more. But for this week, I think we're going to leave it there because this was kind of a heavier one for me, especially in acknowledging that this is just how I've navigated things when it comes to friendships ending and things like this. So I'll shake things off a little bit, and we'll get going next week. I don't remember. I've already done the research and made my notes for myself. So hopefully it won't be so intense next week. But thank you for joining me. We're going to wrap up this week. Once again, welcome to the Chamber of Secrets. Join me next week when we take a look at Chapter 2, Dobby's Warning. And until then, remember, underage wizards are not allowed to perform magic outside of school. Don't get in trouble. Don't get expelled. Okay? Anyway,